Good evening. Thank you. Welcome to St. John's. I'm Michael Hemmesath, president of St. John's University, and I'm honored to be with you this evening for the 8th annual Eugene McCarthy Lecture, Conscience and Courage in Public Life. We are privileged to have with us this evening Abbot John Clausen, former president of the College of St. Benedict, Sister Coleman O'Connell, and several St. Ben's and St. John's trustees. We're here just to make sure we're staying on the straight and narrow. Also joining us this evening are Senator Eugene McCarthy's daughter, Ellen McCarthy, his son Michael McCarthy, and other members of the McCarthy family and friends. We're gathered here tonight to have a conversation about conscience and courage in public life, to honor Gene McCarthy. St. John's was always in Gene's blood. While only 19 years old, Eugene graduated from St. John's with top academic honors, while also excelling in baseball and hockey. He inspired countless students in our classrooms here on campus and was even a member of the monastic community for a short period of time. Even though Gene's life guided him to Congress eventually, Gene never left this place. We found him visiting the campus and community often during his public days. Tonight, we also want to recognize a man who demonstrates Gene's values of conscience and courage each and every day, former U.S. Senator Dave Durenberger. We're grateful to Catherine and Dan Whalen for endowing the Eugene McCarthy Center for Public Policy and Civic Engagement at St. John's. Through the center's programs, internships, and other student opportunities, we carry on Senator McCarthy's commitment to the common good and to civic engagement. While the Whalens are unable to be with us this evening, please join me in acknowledging their wonderful support for the Eugene McCarthy Center. And now I'd like to introduce Dr. Matt Lindstrom, the Edward L. Henry Professor of Political Science and Director of the McCarthy Center. Matt.
Thank you, President Hemmesath, and welcome, and thanks to all of you for your attendance and support of the 8th Annual Eugene McCarthy Lecture. Tonight, we welcome back to campus Senator Durenberger and Gary Eichten, two iconic Johnnies who manifest our impressive tradition of graduates working on behalf of the common good with a spirit of civil discourse. I'm especially grateful to both of these gentlemen for their involvement not only tonight, but with the McCarthy Center really since day one. Finally, a big thanks to Minnesota Public Radio is recording tonight's event and will rebroadcast this or broadcast this in the near future. We have a little bit of an in. There's someone on the stage here, so that's helpful. It is my distinct pleasure to serve as the director of the McCarthy Center and have the opportunity to really work closely with so many impressive colleagues, alums, and students. And one of those students, in fact, is Katie Tillman, who will introduce our distinguished guests. Katie is a senior political science double major with German and poli-sci, as I mentioned, from Shakopee, Minnesota, and has been involved with the McCarthy Center for the last several years. She is a recipient of the McCarthy Center's John Brandel Scholarship for summer internships, and in fact, spent last summer in Bosnia working at the Center for Civic Initiatives. So thank you, Katie, for introducing tonight's guests.
Thank you, Professor Lindstrom. It is an honor for me to introduce tonight not one, but two very exemplary individuals, both of whom have their humble beginnings here at the College of St. Benedict and St. John's University. First, Gary Eichten. For the past 20 years, Gary has graced the morning routines of many Minnesotans as the humble yet insightful host of Minnesota Public Radio's midday program. The remarkable lifelong career in broadcast journalism began when Gary took a job as a student announcer on a little startup radio station called KSJR here in Collegeville in 1967. This little station evolved into Minnesota Public Radio, the station that 800,000 people across the state know and love today. In his over 40 years at MPR, Gary has served in a variety of capacities as news director, special events producer, station manager, and host of all the major news programs. He has had the honor of interviewing figures like Governor Jesse Ventura, Governor Mark Dayton, and former Vice President Walter Mondale. He had the burden of communicating the news of Paul Wellstone's death to the people of Minnesota as the events unfolded in 2002. His passion and talent has not gone unnoticed. Gary has received several national awards for his career in journalism, including the Corporation for Public Broadcasting's award for Best Local News Program. Additionally, he contributed to the development of 2 Peabody Award-winning documentaries. In an era in which journalism has been plagued by talking heads and negative rhetoric, Gary Eichten represents a beacon of sanity. Tonight, Gary Eichten will be interviewing our 8th annual McCarthy Lecturer right here on stage. Please give a big welcome to former Midday host and NPR editor-at-large, Gary Eichten.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now it is my pleasure to introduce this year's Eugene J. McCarthy Lecturer, Senator Dave Durenberger. David is a distinguished alumnus, policymaker, and author, and he is well acquainted with life here on our campuses. He was born in Collegeville and grew up at St. John's. His father, George, was the athletic director at SJU. He attended St. John's Prep School and graduated from St. John's University in 1955. While on campus, he was involved in the ROTC program, eventually going on to serve in the United States Army as an officer in military intelligence. He attended law school at the University of Minnesota and served as then-Governor Harold Levander's chief of staff from 1967 to 1970. Dave was elected to the United States Senate in 1978, in the seat formerly occupied by Muriel Humphrey after the death of her husband, Hubert Humphrey. He had the honor of serving 3 terms, the longest of any Republican senator in the history of Minnesota. During his 17 years in office, Dave has impacted many facets of the policymaking process. He served 16 years on the Senate's Finance Committee, 12 years on Environment and Public Works, 10 years on Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions, 4 years on Government Affairs, and 8 years on the Select Committee on Intelligence. His passion for healthcare reform inspired him to lead the Minnesota Citizens Forum on healthcare costs by the appointment of Governor Tim Pawlenty, and inspired his authorship of 2 books, Prescription for Change and Neither Madmen Nor Messiahs. Of all these accomplishments, it is his dedication to bipartisanship that makes him a true testament to the values embodied by Gene McCarthy. Whether it was President Bush's 1,000 points of light bill or President Clinton's National Community Service Act, Dave Durenberger was always willing to reach across the aisle and vote with the interests of the American people, not just his party in mind. His long career in public service serves as an inspiration for aspiring leaders on both sides of the aisle. Please join me in welcoming Dave Durenberger.
Thank you all very much. Thank you, Katie. Appreciate it. Well, we've asked Senator Durenberger this evening to look back on that long, distinguished career in public service, take a look at some of the lessons that have been learned and some of the lessons that probably still need some learning. Senator, thanks for joining us this evening. Appreciate it.
It's my pleasure to come home.
So before we get into public policy, this, that, and the other thing, what did you want to be when you were growing up here in Collegeville? Did you want to be a U.S. Senator?
No. Even a year before I ran for the Senate, I didn't want to be United States. I wanted to be a priest for a long time.
Yeah.
Probably it was my end of my junior year in high school that I decided that I wasn't cut out for it. Latin was a requirement. I wasn't that good at Latin. I think there was more that was required than just Latin. But that's the one thing that I can remember wanting to be, and after that, it's sort of like, okay, let's see what tomorrow has to offer.
Mm-hmm. A lot of people have already asked me to ask you about gridlock, polarization, and might as well get right to it since we're here to talk about civic engagement, civil discussion, and the rest. First of all, has Washington always been like it is today?
Let me tell you my first introduction to Washington, D.C. And this happened before I'd even been to the Senate floor for the first time. There were 20 of us elected in 1978, half Republican, half Democrat. And I took office before anybody else did. So I was 81st in seniority, and I had never even seen the inside of the Senate. But what I did have, within 48 hours of the announcement of my selecting the Senate Finance Committee, the most powerful blah, 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 was a handwritten letter from its chairman, Russell Long of Louisiana. I didn't know Russell Long. I knew of Huey Long and the Longs of Louisiana, but I didn't know Russell. But I had this handwritten letter from Russell Long, which described in summary detail the relationship between Minnesota and Louisiana going back to the Louisiana Purchase. So when I met him, I said, with all due respect, Mr. Chairman, I know I have a lot to learn, but I want to start with that letter you wrote me. What does that mean? And he said, well, this is 1979. We're in our second energy crisis. Oil and gas prices are going through the roof. He says, this year, we're going to have a windfall profits tax on gas and oil before the committee. And in Louisiana, all we do is produce gas and oil. Mm-hmm. And in Minnesota, all you guys do is burn it. So if it's between the two of us, guess who wins? And he said very quickly, he said, this I will never forget. He said, fortunately, the founders of the country decided there should be two of us. There should be one body, legislative body in this country, in which there were two senators from every one of the states. And by the time, and he said this precisely, by the time all states have been heard from, we get national energy policy because it's good for my constituents and it's good for yours. That's the Senate that I went into.
It doesn't sound like the Senate we know today.
No, it's not the Senate we know today.
Well, we have an election in 2 months. Mm-hmm. Can we expect dramatic change as a result? Are we in a position where we could expect the voters to make and to insist basically on that by golly we want some change here, we want action in Washington, or more of the same?
So my one experience with that kind of an election was 1978. Mm-hmm. People were, to quote the movie Network, madder than hell, don't want to take it anymore. And they decided, since the Democrats were in charge and inflation was going up and Jimmy Carter couldn't find, whatever it was he was looking for in Tehran at the time, they decided to use Republicans. And I was one of them, and Rudy Boschwitz was the other one. And we were being used to vent people's feelings. So today, you look at the polls, and it looks like the Republicans could win the Senate again. I mean, just the latest poll that I saw. But behind that, the same polls are telling you that Congress has like a 7% approval rating with all these people out here in this audience and all these people in central Minnesota and all over the country. 7%. David Brooks in the New York Times said, we have a crisis. We have a morale crisis in this country. I mean, people don't know who to trust. So maybe a bunch of mad people go and vote Republican, mm-hmm. and a bunch of Democrats get persuaded that they should go and vote so the Republicans don't get in. But there's a significant number of us who wish we had better choices than we've been given in the last few years, and that we might be given at the polls today. And I'm not sure where we're all going. I know that both sides would like me to endorse them in Minnesota, and I'm sure other former senators have been asked the same thing. But because I have the feeling that I've just expressed to you from my experience about the United States Senate and what an incredibly, at a time like this, what an incredibly important body it is, I can't just be, if I'm a Republican, an automatic Republican endorsement, or were I a Democrat, an automatic Democrat endorsement. I just think times right now call for something else, and if we don't get it from the candidates, I'm not sure right now where we're going to get it. But it's a burden that I feel that
we should clarify. You were elected as a Republican.
Yes.
Basically lifelong, but no more? Or are you still, what do you call yourself today?
I still call myself a Republican, but as soon as I start trying to describe what kind of Republican I am, I get in trouble because I want to use words like pragmatic, you know. I never got anything done without finding a Democratic senator whose constituents had the same kind of problem my constituents had, and together we design a solution. You know, that insofar as the difference between liberals and conservatives lie in the role of government, we'd find a way to do it, and that's why it was successful.
How has Barack Obama done as president? Now, you supported him when he ran, correct?
Well, I voted for him.
Yes.
Because the other choice was John McCain, and I knew John McCain pretty well. I served with him for a long time, and John has many strengths, and he's got a couple of critical weaknesses. So yes, I voted for him. I walked the line June 4th. I did not go to a Democratic primary because not a Democrat. In Minnesota, people were standing, you know, blocks long to get into their primaries. But on June 4th, the snow was gone, the ice was gone, and 35,000 Minnesotans were lined up to get into the Xcel Energy Center. Mm-hmm. On June 4th, which is when Barack Obama, Senator Obama, and Michelle were here to do their fist bump and say, here we go. And I walked the line for an hour and a half, just asking people who recognized me, what are you doing here? And every one of them said, not one of them said, said anything bad about George Bush. Every one of them said, I'm here to see history made. 35,000 people. I will never forget that. Mm-hmm. So history's being made in October, I think it is, 17th of September. The whole financial industry is collapsing. The President of the United States and the Secretary of Treasury call both the Republican and Democratic candidate to the White House. Guess who steps up and says, I'll help you bail out the financial industry? It was not John McCain. It was Barack Obama. I mean, why would a Democrat want to bail a Republican president or his secretary or even, you know, some of their followers out of this? But he did it. And then he took on the challenge in the middle of 700,000 people a month, I mean, being laid off from their jobs, not just laid off, but jobs, getting rid of the jobs. He decided to take on something no other president's been successful at, passing a health reform bill. And not one single Republican supported that effort, even though it improves the quality of health care, the effectiveness of health care, and expands the coverage. It takes the burden off of all of us who pay health insurance for having to cover out of our insurance plan people that don't have coverage. He did that, and what happened? So I'm not making excuses for the president. I'm not making excuses for the fact that he's improved his golf handicap from 22 to 18, you know. I wish he had the gift of communicating with us today as well as he did during the campaign. Wednesday night is going to be the first time we're going to see him in a long time, you know, just whatever time he's going to get, you know, from the networks and the cables and so forth, to talk to us about something none of us understand. And a week ago he said he didn't have a strategy for. Mm-hmm. I'm sure it's hard to understand, but it's not impossible. Nobody out here believes that the President of the United States hasn't got all the information that's available on this ISIL or whatever it is, you know, and there's lots of things he can't do about it. But he ought to by now be able to frame the issues for us so that when we have to face him, we can say, yeah, God, I'll write my senator and my congressman to get behind you. He hasn't been able to use his natural gifts and that hopey-changey thing or whatever it was that everybody said that they expected from him. He hasn't been able to use that to communicate with us as well as he could.
I was going to say, besides some specific policy ideas that Barack Obama ran on, he also told us that he was going to change the culture in Washington. And if anything, it's become more divisive, more polarized. Why was he not able to do that?
Because he's trying to catch it in the middle of a cycle. It's like stopping, stopping a sled on an icy hill going over a car, when your car starts spinning out of control on ice, you can't, it's pretty hard to stop it in the middle before it hits another car or something like that. He meant it when he said it. Every one of us said right on. But half the country said, not with that guy. And a good share of those people didn't like the fact that he was an African American.
So you think racism was a
of course,
big
there's
part
no
of
question. I mean, you look at the polls, look at where the votes are coming from, look at where the heat of where somebody says, don't go south of a certain point, if you want to get any Republican or any Democratic votes, Look at who's in trouble, in the Senate. The last surviving Democrat in the South, is David Pryor, or David Pryor's son, Mark Pryor. No, you can't tell me there isn't a lot of that going on in America. But there's lots of other negative feelings, too, being expressed.
When you were riding high in the Senate in the 80s, there was talk that Dave Durenberger might end up as a presidential candidate. Did you want to be president?
Never. I had a colleague in my class that I came in with in 1978, Larry Pressler from South Dakota, who told us about 6 months after he'd gotten there that he should be president. And most of us, now he's running for senator in South Dakota again, I think. But I recall looking at Larry and talking to Larry, and I said, oh my God, what makes you think you can be president? And he said, well, I don't know. It's worth trying, But that was about it. No, honest to God, no, never. Not that I learned. I don't want to say I love the Senate. That's not the appropriate expression. But I learned early on to appreciate what an incredible gift that office is, and you don't want to waste a lot of time, in taking advantage of it. And it doesn't. The president has a whole different set of priorities and expectations and things like that. But this body, unlike the House and like lots of other places, there is nothing like it in the world. And everybody kind of knows that. And I was privileged to discover that early on, as I'm sure Gene did when he had that same opportunity. And for me, it was just not time to be wasted. It was not an opportunity to turn my back on. And I ended up being pretty good at it.
The people who did run for president got elected. Which in your lifetime, who's the best president?
Who?
And who's the worst one?
That's the one question I didn't think you were going to ask. But well, the one that the president that was able to get the most out of the time that he had was George H.W. Bush. Ronald Reagan, by comparison, came to office with 16 brand new senators and the big swing in the country. We're tired of inflation and high interest rates and stuff like that. We're ready for anything. And we get President Reagan, and with him came a vision and all the rest of that sort of thing. And he had a lot of momentum, and a lot of us took advantage of that momentum. But a lot of us also had to do a great deal to sort of reshape, some of the ideas that he had in order to make them effective. And the 1986 Tax Act was a good example of that. But for a person who had just a short term with Democrats in both the House and the Senate, I would say George H.W., or 41, did in 1 year, I recall, we did the Americans with Disabilities Act, Republican president. We did the Clean Air Act, with incredible piece of work with a Republican president. We did the Civil Rights Restoration Act, and there are probably other things. But he also had the gift of the people that worked for him in the White House were not second-guessing him, around the Senate or the House or something like that. He had a very loyal staff and very committed staff. He never tried to bite off more than he could chew, except probably in in Kuwait. But that's a whole nother issue. So, as an underrated president, I'd like to nominate him for your list. And the only, and I'm going to put somebody else on the list of worse, even though his record says, you know, we had great economy and all the rest of that sort of thing. And I put Bill Clinton on that list only because we have not, in my lifetime, elected somebody with that much potential, and that includes Barack Obama. Mm-hmm. Bill Clinton has the most unique gifts God's ever given to any human being, and some that God didn't give him, but he acquired some other place, I think. You know, he was this. We all talked about this. You know, when you're with Bill Clinton, you're the only person in the room, even though there's 1,000 other people. But as soon as you walk out the door, you know, everything that he's told you that he's going to support and he's going to do, he changes his mind. He never took advantage, as you know, of the opportunity, given all that talent that he had when he was president.
He, of course, faced impeachment. Richard Nixon almost was, well, he was on the verge of being impeached when he left. Is that a good way to deal with presidents you don't like?
I suspect not. Anyway, no, it isn't. It's not. But those were just circumstances that were unique. Nixon's one was, you know, well, they both, in one way, you could say, they did themselves in. But I don't know that in this day and age, impeachment is still a good and appropriate tool. I don't. I haven't given that a lot of thought, but I just don't think it's an appropriate tool. Certainly, this talking impeachment with the current president, and when the talk is all coming from people who've done everything they can to cut him down, is inappropriate.
We talk about your situation a little bit. You were, you're really one of the most influential senators in America. There was talk of you running for president, even though you weren't really interested. And then you had your fall from grace, 1990. Senate voted unanimously to censure you, denounce you, I guess as it was called, for misuse of public funds. And I don't want to regurgitate all of that, but what I am interested in, Senator, is from a personal viewpoint. I mean, you came from this background of ethics, of morality. You lived your life like that. And, you know, you were on top of the world, and then you weren't. What's that like?
On the bad side, it's hell. On the good side, it's opportunity. The first term, I spent 4 years. The most important thing I probably had to do is get reelected. Otherwise, all that work would be wasted. But in my first term, I discovered what I could get done in a second term. So the second term became very powerful. What happened was I spent all my time in that second term with this job that I had and all these opportunities to be seized. Did you know that a United States senator can pick up the phone and talk to anybody anywhere in the world because they'll answer the phone? This is incredible. But the bigger gift is the gift you have as whether it's education, healthcare, the environment, all the rest of these kinds of issues, of putting together the legislative process you're elected to deal with. And I burned myself out on that process. And what I did was delegate a whole lot of my personal responsibility that I should have been accountable for to other people. And when the 1988 election came along, and a bunch of lawyers in Minnesota, as part of Skip Humphrey's campaign, filed a complaint with the Ethics Committee because I took my son Michael to Puerto Rico with me. And the company that sponsored my trip to Puerto Rico paid for Michael's trip. That became an issue in my campaign. So that's how I got to the Ethics Committee. But by the middle of 1989, my first year in the Senate, I discovered that after me were the Keating Five and Alan Cranston, Al D'Amato. There were about, and I think there were a total of 8 or 9 United States senators in one way or another, but I was the first one on the list. And I knew what being first on that kind of a list meant. So I asked, first, even before that, this is important to me at least, just the fact that I had to deal with delegating away what was my own responsibility because of the power that I thought I was able to use for good purposes taught me something about myself that I didn't like, and I changed who I was as a person. And I will never regret that. That's when I say it was a good experience. And I was a changed person from that day on. And I'm not going to go into all the rest of the detail, but it was reflected in everything that I've done after that, and as I hope that I do today. With regard to the Senate unanimous vote, I did that on purpose. I went to those who were closest to me that were helping me in my defense, and I asked them to ask everybody in the Senate to vote for my censure, and they did.
How long did it take you to get over that whole process?
I haven't gotten over it, but I can tell you that it has helped me. When I talked to you, when I just mentioned to you what it did for me as a person, recognizing the person that I could be and should be, as apart from being the senator, that sort of thing. I went, for example, just to give you an illustration of it, I went to Tim McGuire, who is the editor of the Minneapolis Tribune. And the Minneapolis Tribune had done a better job than anybody else in just cutting me down wherever they could. And we sat down over lunch one day, and we talked about, what he was doing, what I was doing, and I wasn't trying to solve any problem. I just wanted Tim to understand what was going on with me, and I wanted to understand what was going on with him. During the course of that time we spent together, he broke down and cried. He talked to me he says, nobody else has ever talked to me like this before. And he began to tell me the story of his life. We have ended up, even though he's now in Arizona, but we ended up in a small group of Catholic men who meet every Monday morning that talk about our faith, our walk in life, the trials that others are having that we can contribute to in one way or another. So those are and I use that only as an illustration of, and I'm sure other people have been through a lot worse than I've been through, But I'm, in a way, I don't want to say grateful for having gone through this, because you can't be, because the people that have to live with this are my family, But they also get to live, I hope, with a better person than I was when this all started.
You mentioned religion. What role, in your mind, Senator, should religion play in the public sphere? I mean, is it purely a private thing? Is there a role for religion to shape public policy? What's your thinking on that?
You better, and I hope maybe I've alluded, and I haven't done it maybe as well as I should, but I hope I've alluded to the fact that your faith is a very personal thing to you, and mine is to me. One of the greatest gifts I've been given is produced right here at St. John's University. Every morning I open it up and, give us this day our daily bread. And so my faith is very private to me. I'm a Catholic and I practice and so forth, but my faith is very private to me. And in the United States Senate, every Wednesday morning, a group of us, there were as many as 24, 25 men and women, who got together, and they still do this. They've been doing it since 1952. Jewish senators, and regardless of the background, get together and talk about their faith to each other. And it's very important to who you are as a person, and who understanding who the people are that you're dealing with, and when you're in an intimate kind of a situation like we're in. But when it takes the next step, which gets into what we call the activity of the religious right, the social issues, and all the rest of that sort of thing, where somebody in that religion is telling you that this is what you have to do as the United States Senator, no, you can't do that.
Is there a time that you look back on and say, this was the golden age of politics in America? This is the time that we should look back on, learn those lessons, conduct ourselves as people did back then? Any time like that?
Not in my lifetime. I don't think. I'm hoping the golden age is out ahead of us, you know. And I have to hope that to be optimistic. And I have to be optimistic because today I talked to a whole bunch of these students who weren't even alive when I left the Senate. When I left the Senate, not when I got in, but when I left the Senate. That's a marvelous opportunity to listen to people like my own grandkids, you know, who want to believe that in the people that we elect every time we go to the polls, there's hope. You know, this change you can believe in and the hope and everything like that. Just that, the 35,000 people, that wasn't just Barack Obama. That's something that everybody feels. And the worse things get, the more of us feel that, and the more of us need that. And so I don't think there was ever a time when any kind of a golden age. The time that I served, with the example I gave you of Russell Long, and the many examples I could give you of the work that I did with my Republican colleagues and my Democratic colleagues, for me, that was a golden age. That was a golden age. And that's the way the Senate can always operate. And what has torn it down was decisions taken principally on the side of the House. Newt Gingrich is the best figure of it, that the only way Republicans can be a majority party is to tear down the Democrats and sometimes people that don't agree with them who are Republican. Why do you think all the moderates, so to speak, like me, left the United States Senate with 2 exceptions, or 3 exceptions, 4 exceptions? Arlen Specter switched parties, and in about by 1996, 98, 2000, because there was a deliberate effort. I saw it with Jim Jeffords, you know, who just died recently, a deliberate effort to change the nature of the party and the kind of people it represented, people, and that's still going on. You know, it hasn't changed to this day.
But if you're a real believer in conservative causes, why is it inappropriate to say, well, Mr. Durenberger, we appreciate your service, but we want somebody who is more in tune with our beliefs?
Well, the definition of our beliefs. That's it, you know. If I wanted only Catholics, you know, then, well, I don't know what we all believe. Are we Catholics sometimes? But you know what I mean? In my day, our beliefs came from where we were born, the people we were raised with, our families, where we were educated, communities like Gene and I grew up in, you know, Watkins, Collegeville, St. John's, you know, all this sort of thing. That's where our values developed and our beliefs developed, and we added to that in our parties broad platforms, very representative of everyone who says, I have a liberal inclination or I have a conservative inclination in those days, as they were described, and mainly in their view of the role of government. And broad platforms, inventive platforms, and those platforms went with us into office, whether it was governor in Minnesota, the legislature. You know, I'm talking now about the 60s and the 70s and so forth. And those were the days when you stood for something, and you knew who was a Republican because they were, you know, here's the process by which you were selected or who was a Democrat. Today, you start with the 3 things, whatever they are. If you don't do these 3 things, you disagree with any one of these 3, you know, you can't make it. And the other thing is, currently, that my party does better than anybody else, I think, is tell you what they're against. You know, I'm against government, I'm against regulation, I'm against taxes. Okay. So let's see, 6 years later, you know, what have you accomplished, and how have you accomplished it? So it isn't going to work. So, you know, beliefs, I don't know that there are, I mean, I don't know what the beliefs are today when I look at Republicans.
One more question, then I want to open up for audience questions. So get your question ready, and we'll get to you in just a moment. One more, please. Eugene McCarthy, probably best remembered as the man who challenged his own president and tried to stop the Vietnam War. How would you like to be remembered?
Well, let's see. I don't think the memory that I want people to have is the personal relationship that we've developed. So I can't say that I could go to New Hampshire and stop a president or something like that. And I told the students today, one of the students asked me, what was your proudest moment or the proudest achievement? And I thought for about 1 second, I thought about the answer to that in the way you mean proud or that sort of thing. And then it came to me that I know the thousands or more people that have stopped me at one time or another since I got out of the Senate to thank me for something that I did or my staff did while I was in the Senate for them. And I don't know how many times I've told my former colleagues who all worry about the legislation they pass and all that sort of thing, that is not what you're going to be remembered for. You are going to be remembered for all those relationships built one person at a time, one incident at a time, one problem at a time, one challenge at a time. And I really have little reason to doubt that that's the best way for anyone who wants to go into public service, whether it's the mayor of St. Cloud or the county commissioner in Stearns County or it's a congressman or a United States senator. You want to be remembered for how solid those relations were and how faithful you were to the commitments that you made.
Former Minnesota Senator Dave Durenberger.
Thank you.
All right. Now, I would like to get some audience questions. I can't see you. Oh, there we go. Do we have people lined up already over there? Is that? Oh, excellent. All right, well, let's start over here.
Hi, my name is Mackenzie Kraus, and first and foremost, I wanted to thank you for coming out here tonight. It has been an honor having you as a guest here. This past summer, I was one of 16 students from St. Ben's and St. John's who got to participate in the Washington, D.C. Summer Study Program. And I know that we all gained incredible insight into the lifestyle of working in public service. And I was just wondering, what was the most fulfilling aspect of serving as a senator?
Your question is, what's the most fulfilling aspect of public service? And again, I'm going to start by saying it's the relationships that you make and how you build on those relationships, whether they're, for your own moving yourself forward or it's doing it for other people. But I think I say this because I believe it, that you do not have to be a United States Senator to have a huge influence, but you have to be involved in public service. And that can be the work you do most of it will be a work you do in your community. There are so many opportunities today in every community in America for you to discover things about yourself that you didn't even know existed in public service. You can get appointments, you can get employment, you can get elected if you choose to do that. I have become I was always a believer in federalism and the best government is that closest to home. And now I know the most effective government is that closest to home. And so if you were to ask me, where do I start if I want to go into elected office, I would say I would set my sights on something like the school board, the county commissioner, the city council, even if it's the planning commission, maybe it's the park commission, maybe it's it's just right today where people don't do the stuff they're doing in Washington, D.C. to each other is at the local level. And it's just going to be the greatest place in the world to get started. There's so many opportunities. You're going to learn so much. And by the time you decide you want to run for Congress or president or the Senate, you're going to be more than prepared.
To this side of the aisle.
And my name is Gary Osberg with Minnesota Public Radio. And my question is, what specific legislation would you recommend that the administration go for to improve the Affordable Care Act?
To improve what?
The Affordable Care Act.
Oh, the Affordable Care Act. Sure. Much of that law, as I indicated, was based on stuff that we'd worked on in the past. If the Republicans had participated in the drafting of the Affordable Care Act, they could have done a couple things that I think are important. And one of them is in the potential for privatizing the Medicare program, because we experimented with that back in the 1980s, and getting private insurance companies involved in selling Medicare, not just the supplemental to the government's Medicare, but the Medicare program itself. We were using what's called health maintenance organizations, HMOs, at the time. They were incredibly successful, but not many parts of the country had them. So, and since then, the course of privatization is something called the Medicare Advantage program. And what the Medicare Advantage program has become is a private ripoff, in effect. I mean, I know people get benefits from it. I don't want to, ripoff's too strong a word, but we paid for private Medicare in our experiments in the 80s, 95 cents on every dollar we were spending on the government-run Medicare program. Now they're paying something like $1.10 or $1.12 or $1.15 to these private insurance companies to do the same thing. My point is that if it's constructed appropriately, you can run a private Medicare program that in effect will bring to bear most of the talent of the private side and a lot of the effectiveness that they're going to be achieving too. That's one of the things. The second one is the tax subsidies. Right now, we subsidize poor people through the Medicaid program, as everyone knows. We subsidize better off people through employer-paid health insurance, because nobody's paying any tax on that. And if you get old and disabled, then we put you back in the poor people's program again, called Medicaid. Not necessary. And one of the vehicles for getting to the ideal world is to change the tax subsidy so that it more adequately reflects the costs of the health care benefits in a given community, adjusted by the person's capacity to pay. So you don't need a special welfare program to do it. So now that's going to take some time to work itself out. But there are a number of other things I could go into. I mean, long-term care insurance. I mean, God Almighty, we probably wouldn't have gotten that one done. But why we sell long-term care insurance to people that want to protect their assets, and disability insurance to young people who will never use it, I don't understand. Because we could sell private disability insurance to everybody in America when they're young. And when they age into their disabilities, as eventually even you and I will, you've got insurance coverage. You've got private insurance coverage. It always comes at the end of thank you for the question, and those are at least three things that I think Republicans could contribute.
My name is Edwin Torres. I'm a junior political science major. First of all, thank you for coming. I've had the pleasure to be around you for a couple of hours this whole entire day, so it's been a great honor to get some of your wisdom. My question's kind of broad, so I'm not sure how you will answer it, but so often we hear how bad the government is doing, how good the government is doing, or not enough that the government is doing. So in your own perspective, what is the role of government?
What is the role of government?
Yes. Nice small question. It sounds like one of those questions that do you still use those blue books that you have to write the essays in?
Exam.
Oh, man.
Well, I can tell you one thing, you're going to get a different answer to that question depending on the part of the country you go to, because this is one of those countries where culturally, people think very differently from one part of the country to the other. But in the part of the country we all come from here in Minnesota, the answer was given us by our people who settled this state, and they were basically Yankee entrepreneurs from New England who were fairly frugal people, but they had a social conscience, as well, and by Northern European immigrants, and a lot of those values, are still here, and they all recognize that sometimes government's most appropriate role is to provide for everyone what only a few can access, with their own means. And education, healthcare, national defense, but a lot of issues that relate to education, healthcare. Obviously the role of government in issues like the environment. Suppose you left it to the market to clean the air. You left it to the market to clean water. What would a market-based system do? On the other hand, the role of government, in the Clean Air Act of 1990, we designed something called Best Available Control Technology. And we gave the industries incentives to set the health standards for environmental air pollution. Because if they could enhance the environmental controls on the air, they'd get rewarded for developing the product. And we wouldn't have to, artificially. We did the acid rain, the trading, so we created a market for dirty air or for clean air, depending on how you look at it, because we recognized where most of the pollutants were going, and there were a lot of old power plants in there. And so how do you trade off between the old and the new? How do you use the tax code to trade that off to clean the air? There are lots of examples that we don't have time for tonight about how you use government, but all of them have the same thing in common, that there are just, if we are going to live in a society or a community that we can all be proud of, then the role of government is to make that possible for every one of us. I mean, how do you think civil rights? How do you think women got the right to vote? We can go on and on and on with this kind of an issue. But there are just some times that the collective efforts that we put in to these kinds of things are essential to make the whole community and the whole society a better place and a better place in which to live.
Well, a follow-up. You said earlier that local government, the closer government is to the people, the better the government. How in the world can a locally based governmental unit, whatever it might be, deal with things like acid rain, national defense, civil rights? Don't those big issues require a national response?
Well, there's there's a lot of ways to look at the whole issue. And one of the things that I did before I ever got too far into this sort of thing was I wrote out in conjunction with the work that I did with governors and with county board, the National Association of Counties. I worked out and I can't remember them, so I'm not going to try to repeat them. But I wrote out 8 principles for the better function, the role of government in improving the function of markets. And then I wrote out 10 principles for the national government. And I started with national security, national defense. I went to income security. I went to things that cross state borders like air, dirty air, a variety of things like that. But that left a whole lot of things that the state and local government could do better. In 1982, when President Reagan said with regard to the disadvantages some people had because of where they lived, he said, well, let them vote with their feet. And a lot of us got together after that, Democrat and Republican governors and I and a couple of other people, and said, that's not adequate, Mr. President. And so we helped him create a new federalism proposal. And we got him to agree that the federal government should swap with the states You know, if the states took the poverty, the long-term care program, and the federal government would take over the acute care for the low-income people. And then we put all of the existing health and social programs into a block grant. We offered that to the states. And as they bought down the block grant, the services, they said, we'll take responsibility for it. This is our effort to get the South to step up and do some of the things, you know, that they neglect doing for their constituents. The incentive would be that we would take the excise taxes that the federal government was levying in those states. We'd take them out of the states. We'd get out of the telephone tax business and a lot of this sort of thing. That's the last effort anybody has made at trying to work out this problem of, you know, what should the federal government do, what should the state government do? But it's critically important because there's half of this country, the states are willing to step up on a whole lot of issues, and the other half of the country, they're not willing to do it. And then they get the benefit of not having to raise their income taxes and stuff like that.
We have another question over here, please.
Hi, so I was in the student open forum earlier today, and you alluded to something about how we as American government aren't very good at making long-term solutions. And you actually kind of have a track record of, like the Clean Air Act, having long-term solutions to these sort of problems. How do you think we can improve that long-term decision-making with things like Social Security now?
In income security?
Social Security.
Long-term decision-making, how can we get ourselves focused on the
I'm only doing this because sometimes my hearing aids aren't functioning, but the biggest part of it is presidential leadership, you know, because he's got the voice, and to the degree that the president can set a longer-term agenda, that's probably the best way to approach it. Otherwise, it's done by people who have 6-year terms, and they all belong to the United States Senate. And when you can get Republicans and Democrats to agree on setting a long-term agenda, it happens. That's one of the ways that we approach all the health policy issues. I mean, we did health reform through Medicare, Medicaid, and whatever we could from 1982 until the Clintons got there in 93. And when we were in the majority, the Democrats knew, you know, we're going to set the agenda, and we're going to remind them that when they were in, you know, they set the agenda when they're in the majority, and we have an agenda in the Finance Committee in particular, because you talk about tax policy, Medicare, Social Security, and so forth, that is always long-term. Everything has a long-term impact. And so it was much easier because we trusted each other. We knew where each other was coming from. When they're in charge, you know, we'll work with them. When I was chairman of the Health Subcommittee on all those issues, whether it was Max Baucus or it was Jay Rockefeller, you know, they brought the Democratic votes. When they were the chairman and George Mitchell was the chairman, I brought the Republican votes. I mean, our colleagues trusted us to do that. But we, as Finance Committee members, had a kind of a vision. It wasn't one day at a time. We instinctively, because we all worked together on a whole lot of issues, and we discussed these tough ones all the time. And when we tested them with demonstrations, like I was talking about earlier, you know, we found out, yes, this works, that doesn't work, whatever the case may be. So a big part of it gets back to how well the members of Senate or even the House are prepared to work together. And in health policy, we did that with the House in the old days. The House was controlled by the Democrats, but there were really good Republicans as well. And the Republicans on the Ways and Means Committee could get along with most of the Democrats on the Ways and Means Committee as well. And when we went to conference committee, usually the Democrats wanted to do more than we were willing to do. But we always found a way to resolve it. The Clean Air Act, we went to conference, there were only 5 of us, three Democrats, 2 Republicans on the Senate Conference Committee on the Clean Air Act. There were 144 congressmen, and we found a way to get the job done, and most of it went in our favor because we were used to working together.
Last question for you. We've been talking about polarization, division in Washington, gridlock. There seems to be no end to the world crises that we're dealing with right now. You pretty optimistic, though, in the face of all of that, that things will work out well, that we're on the right path?
Yeah, yes, I have to be, number one, I have to be optimistic. Number two, I know it can be done. It's been done in the past. You can tell in Minnesota already that the negative approach that the Republicans had gotten used to taking is starting to crack a little bit. You can tell it by talking to people who, lived through this period of time in the first 10, 12 years of this century, that things aren't going to last. So, yeah, I'm optimistic. But it can't be done without help. And so the problem we have right now is the low morale that David Brooks talked about. The low morale in the country and the 7% approval rating that the Congress currently has, and who's going to go vote. Who's going to go vote, and for whom you're going to vote, and what are you going to get out of the people that you vote for. So I don't have a magic bullet except me and who I might say I support or something like that. And the other people are just like that, other people who have served the way I have. And it's time that a lot of us stepped up to the plate and said there were better days and there's a better future lies ahead, and enough already. Let's expand both parties so that conservative Democrats have a chance in their party and more moderate Republicans have a chance at their party, because the only thing that divides them is, relatively speaking, their views of the role of government, as we were talking about here a little bit earlier. This can't last the way it's been going now. Last point I'll make, because I missed it this afternoon, is the power of a few people and the power of money. I don't know the answer to that one. I knew the answer. I did the 7 Republicans along with the Democrats that McCain finally did in the Senate. Unless we find a way to break the power, and particularly the power that the Supreme Court has given to corporate America and money, these things become a lot harder. But even then, they're doable.
Senator Dave Durenberger, thank you for joining us, and thanks for your public service.
Thank you.